It started on a Wednesday morning, right when the sun had barely broken over the tops of the maples outside my suburban home. I was pouring my first cup of coffee, standing in flannel pants and a gray t-shirt, when I heard the knock, sharp, aggressive, no rhythm. My instincts kicked in before I even reached the door. That knock wasn't a neighbor asking to borrow sugar, it wasn't UPS, and it wasn't some political volunteer. It was the kind of knock meant to intimidate. If you're reading this right, now hit that subscribe button and stay till the end, because what happened next wasn't just illegal. It exposed a terrifying truth behind those who pretend to hold power. When I opened the door, I saw two men dressed in full police tactical gear, black boots, bulletproof vests, dark sunglasses. One of them had police across his chest in bold letters. The other had a radio clipped to his shoulder and his hand resting on the butt of a pistol. "Are you Michael Grant?" one of them asked. I nodded. "You're under investigation for wire fraud and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Step outside, sir." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Dive. Worked for the FBI for over 12 years. Counterintelligence, field operations, internal affairs. I know how real arrests are conducted, and this wasn't one. Their uniforms were wrong. The stitching was too crisp. The patches didn't match standard local department codes, and the badge numbers on their belts were out of sequence. Plus, the so-called warrant they shoved at me was printed on plain white paper, no official seal, no case file number. I played along. "Can I see that again?" I asked, reaching for the warrant. The taller one hesitated, then shoved it toward me again, this time his partner moving in slightly, as if to close the gap between us. I scanned the document quickly. Nothing matched protocol. They hadn't expected scrutiny. "I'm going to need to make a call," I said calmly, stepping back into the house. "Sir, do not," the shorter one began, but I was already moving. The door shut behind me. I didn't lock it. I didn't have to. I picked up my burner phone, dialed. A secure line to Quantico, and within 3 rings, my contact answered. "It's Grant. Possible impersonation attempt. 2 males. Posing as local PD at my door right now. Stay inside. Do not engage. We're notifying local and Fed response." "Copy." I hung up, pulled my Glock from the drawer beneath the kitchen island, and returned to the front hallway. Through the peephole, I watched as the fake cops talked nervously. They were arguing now. They didn't expect me to question them, let alone not panic. Then one of them said something I'll never forget. "We're not waiting. Just grab him and go." At that moment, I knew this wasn't just a scam or a prank. It was a coordinated abduction attempt, highly illegal, deeply dangerous, and probably backed by someone who didn't know who I really was. I opened the door again slowly. "You said you had a warrant?" I asked again, this time aiming low with my voice, the kind of tone we use during interrogation. "Yeah, you heard me," the tall one snapped, "hands behind your back." They moved in quickly, but I was faster. I stepped aside, redirected the one reaching for me into the doorframe, and pinned him against the wall. The other drew his weapon, but before he could aim, I kicked his knee in and disarmed him in a single motion. Both were on the ground in under 10 seconds. They groaned in confusion. "You're making a big mistake," one muttered. I knelt beside him, reached into his vest, and yanked out a phone. "We'll see about that." Within minutes, real, local law enforcement arrived, followed by 2 unmarked government SUVs. My neighbors watched from behind their blinds as officers led the fake cops away in handcuffs, their vests stripped, their eyes wide in disbelief. What they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that this was the beginning of something bigger. These men weren't freelancers or loan scammers. Their equipment was too sophisticated, their timing too precise. They were working off intel, and whoever sent them knew my name, my home address, and my professional background. That wasn't random. That was an inside job. I was taken to a secure location for debriefing, where we began combing through their phones, communication logs, and GPS history. What we uncovered in the next 24 hours cracked open a web of corruption that stretched beyond what any of us imagined. These men were part of a shell organization that had been impersonating officers across several states, detaining, interrogating, even blackmailing individuals under fake authority. And they were targeting people with specific access. Government. Employees, defense contractors, whistleblowers, even journalists. Someone was compiling data on individuals with sensitive clearance. The working theory? A rogue private intelligence group operating under the guise of a patriot movement, funded quietly by high-end donors who wanted leverage over federal operations. I became the new focus of the investigation, not because I was guilty, but because I'd exposed the flaw in their plan. I wasn't just their failed abduction, I was their unraveling. For days I worked with cybersecurity experts, tracing every contact, every phone ping, and every piece of metadata we pulled from the confiscated gear. Every thread led deeper. One number in their call history pinged a private server in Eastern Europe. Another linked to a shipping company in Texas used as a front. As we dug, we realized this wasn't just political, it was financial. Identities, fake tax records, cryptocurrency wallets tied to shell accounts. It was a spiderweb of criminal enterprise hidden beneath the uniform of fake authority. But what really hit me hardest was how easy it had been for them to come to my door in full costume and nearly fool the world. They had badges, radios, even forged body cams. If I hadn't known protocol intimately, I could have ended up in a veneer worse. It made me wonder how many others had already fallen for it. How many citizens had been taken, manipulated, or blackmailed without anyone realizing they'd never met a real officer. The mission became clear. This wasn't just about catching the two men. This was about taking down the system that created them. I reactivated my DPAX's credentials, joined forces with 2 other agents from Cyber Division and Counterterrorism, and we went to work. I wasn't on vacation anymore. I was back in the field this time. The target was personal. But even as we built our case, moved from state to state, and exposed the network node by node, a darker reality set in. Someone was watching us. We started noticing it: drones, burner phone calls that ended as soon as we answered, digital footprints in our devices. They were trying to keep up, trying to stay ahead. That only made us move faster, coordinated. Arrests, raided storage units, intercepted encrypted shipments. One bust in Nevada revealed an entire training ground: fake badges, forged IDs, firearms, and footage of actual surveillance on dozens of innocent targets. The local news never reported it. We kept it quiet. Too many eyes were on us already. One night in a motel outside Phoenix, I received an encrypted email on a dormant FBI device that hadn't been active in years. No subject. Just one sentence. "We know who you are. Stop before it gets worse." I smiled. Because they had just confirmed what I needed. Panic. The predators were now the prey. And I wasn't stopping until every fake badge, every forged warrant, and every stolen identity was burned to the ground. 3 days after the motel warning, I found myself sitting inside a temporary command center we'd set up in a secure facility on the edge of Albuquerque. Surrounded by surveillance footage, decrypted files, and printed maps covered in red markings that stretched across the entire Southwest. Every new piece of evidence we uncovered added to the horrifying realization that the impersonation ring I'd stumbled into wasn't just rogue mercenaries, it was a multi-tiered, well-financed operation that had managed to stay beneath the radar for over 6 years. Their reach extended into local politics, private security firms, even some compromised law enforcement officers in remote counties. They moved like ghosts, but struck like wolves, fast, coordinated, and with a chilling precision that could only come from military training. What unnerved me most wasn't just their tactics, it was their pattern. They were choosing individuals who held keys to infrastructure, intelligence, and policy people. Like me. Former federal agents, cybersecurity experts, military personnel who had gone off-grid or were working in semi-private roles. Became clear that my encounter wasn't a failed abduction, it was a test. They had tested their approach on someone they thought would be an easy grab, but instead, they'd triggered their own downfall. We started connecting names, building the digital DNA of the group, tracing aliases and communication trails using a blend of traditional human and AI pattern detection software. That's when we got a name. The Black Directive was buried deep in a message log from one of the burner phones recovered during the first arrest. At first, it sounded like a code name, but soon we realized it was something else: in ideology. The Black Directive wasn't just an organization, it was a belief system, a doctrine followed by ex-contractors, disillusioned officers, and radical opportunists who believed the federal government was a collapsing system and that shadow enforcement was the future. They were trying to replace authority by pretending to be it. The terrifying part? It was working. One intercepted message showed an entire rural community in Nevada that had accepted Black Directive operatives as their legitimate police force. These men wore uniforms, wrote fake tickets, conducted unlawful investigations, and nobody questioned it because they had the costumes and the guns. The federal reach in those areas was weak, and these operatives exploited it. I knew then that this wasn't just a federal issue, it was a national security crisis in disguise. My team and I initiated what we called Operation Glass Veil. Our mission: expose, isolate, and dismantle every known cell of the directive before they could expand into major cities. But we had a leak. I knew it after an asset we were planning to extract in Tucson vanished 2 hours before the team arrived. Only 4 people knew about the op. One of them had to be compromised. It was a paralyzing realization, one that made me question every file we opened, every call we placed. So I went dark. I told only one person, my former partner from internal ops, Alana Reyes. She was the only one I trusted. The one who once pulled me out of a burning safe house in Karachi. And the one person who could navigate this storm without being noticed. Together, we rerouted our investigation through burner networks and old Cold War protocols, hiding our tracks even from our own agency. We used dead drops in Arizona canyons, encoded messages through amateur radio frequencies, and even passed information through isolated mail carriers who didn't know what they were delivering. Slowly, the shape of the enemy came into view. They operated out of a compound in northern New Mexico, hidden behind a faux agricultural cooperative. The compound was guarded by fake uniforms, surveillance drones, and motion-triggered deterrents. Getting in would require an act of infiltration I hadn't attempted in years. That's when Alana said something I'll never forget. "You know this is suicide, right?" I nodded. "Only if we don't bring the storm with us." Over the next 72 hours, we prepared a black bag mission. Just the 2 of us. No backup. No outside comes. We'd go in, confirm the intelligence, tag the location for federal air support, and extract without triggering the full hornet's nest. We packed EMP grenades, encrypted satellinks, and wore heat-dampening suits to avoid their drone signatures. On a moonless night, we hiked 7 miles through dry scrubland until we reached the ridge above the compound. What we saw through binoculars froze us. Inside the compound were rows of SUVs painted to look like local sheriff units, a barracks, of uniformed men doing drills, and a training center teaching tactics to fresh recruits. But it was what sat in the center that sent a chill through my spine. A wall covered with photos of people, federal employees, agency workers. My photo was there. So was Alana's. And at the top of the wall, written in crude stencil, were the words, "Asset Acquisition List." We were targets, not for arrest, for conversion or elimination. Before we could pull back, a sudden motion sensor sweep caught Alana's leg. Lights flashed, sirens blared. I yanked her down into the brush, rolled us into a dry wash, and triggered the silent beacon on my wrist. We had less than 15 minutes before the compound would be swarming. Alana winced, her leg cut from sharp shale. I handed her a field wrap, pulled her behind a ridge, and waited. But what came next wasn't the compound's response, it was something worse. A group of patrol officers broke into the brush, hunting us with thermal scopes and dogs. I disabled 2 of them silently, but knew more would follow.
Ow.
That's when the roar of engines filled the air. For Blackhawks cut through the sky, they weren't marked, but I knew the silhouette FBI HRT had arrived. The extraction wasn't quiet. Gunfire erupted. The compound lit up like a battlefield, sirens bleeding into chaos as operatives tried to destroy documents and flee. One of them screamed, "They're here because of Grant." That moment told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer a ghost. I was a target of legend to these people, and they feared what I could reveal. Extraction took 15 Minutes. We were in the air before dawn. The compound burned behind us, and 47 operatives were arrested, some of them former military, others foreign nationals operating under fake credentials. The case broke open on national news within a week, but not everything was finished. 3 key leaders of the Black Directive vanished, no traces, no digital trails. Just ghosted. And one message was left on a destroyed laptop recovered in the operation. This was only the first experiment. I've dealt with terrorists, warlords, and corrupt officials. But nothing chills me more than the thought of a domestic army, pretending to be protectors while working to destabilize everything. The Directive had lost their fortress, but they hadn't lost their ideology. And people like that don't stop. They hide, regroup, and evolve. So I returned to Washington. I gave testimony to a closed Senate committee, helped initiate new federal oversight into impersonation crimes, and quietly supported legislation that made it a felony to stage illegal enforcement actions. The Directive's network was shattered, but the shards were still sharp. I never went back to my old home. I bought a cabin 2 hours north where I live quietly and watched the world rebuild its sense of truth and trust. But every morning I check the woods. Every night I double-lock the gate. On the wall near my desk is a photograph not of me, but of those 2 fake officers standing at my door, their arrogance captured on my security cam just seconds before I stopped playing along. It's not there to remember fear. It's there to remind me what happens when we let false authority wear real power. 'Cause sometimes the scariest villains don't kick down the door. They knock politely in uniform with a badge they printed in their basement. And if we don't know how to fight back, we let them in. In the weeks that followed the raid on the New Mexico compound, the Bureau operated like a machine awakened from a long slumber, funneling agents and resources into identifying every single offshoot of the Black Directive network. We had names, faces, and a mountain of seized intel, but what we didn't have was certainty about how far their roots went. I found myself buried in intelligence briefings, digital forensics, and coordination calls that extended from the NSA, 2 local sheriff offices, all trying to untangle who was acting alone and who had been quietly supporting this insurgent movement of fake authority. The eerie part. Most of the operatives weren't obvious radicals. Many were middle-aged men with spotless military records, former police officers turned private security consultants, and even school board members who, on paper, seemed like average citizens. But behind the curtains, they were scripting. A parallel world one, where they held power, control, and the right to enforce made-up laws with manufactured badges. While the official agencies focused on sweeping up the identified cells, I knew the most dangerous members the planners were still free. That fact haunted me when I returned to my temporary safe house outside Denver. I was barely through the door when my secure line lit up with an encrypted message from Reyes. Something's wrong. Need to talk. Not over phone. I met her the next morning in a diner we'd used during earlier ops. Her face said it all before she spoke a word. "We found a new layer," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Look. On the screen were receipts, data transfers, and photos of face-to-face meetings between known Directive members and several officials from a prominent private security firm contracted by multiple state agencies." I stared at the name and felt my chest tighten. "They're subcontracted in D.C., I muttered. "They're on federal ground. Nobody's vetted their staff in over 2 years," she replied. That changed everything. The Directive wasn't just planting operatives in rural counties. They had backdoored themselves into official contracts, guarding courthouses, state labs, and even one Federal Reserve annex. If they decided to act on that leverage, they could create chaos on a national scale. I made the decision then. We had to go public. It's not full-blown media exposure, but a closed hearing with top federal oversight. It was risky. If the wrong people got wind, it could trigger retaliation. But if we stayed silent, we'd be complicit in the next wave. Reyes and I spent the next 5 days assembling a bulletproof case: visuals, logs, voice recordings, payment trails. Everything had to be irrefutable. When the hearing date was set, we flew to D.C. in plain clothes, keeping low. We were escorted into a CIF-sensitive compartmented information facility where 6 high-level members of the DOJ, DHS, and FBI oversight sat behind a long desk, flanked by armed marshals. I presented first, laying out the scope and the breach. Reyes followed with the evidence from the compound, followed by forensic timelines showing how directive operatives gained security clearances using stolen identities and fraudulent certifications. By the end, the room was silent. One of the officials, a former general, leaned forward. "And you're sure this wasn't just a fringe movement?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Sir, if we don't act now, in 2 years, these men won't be pretending to be the police. They'll be the only ones people see as police." After 3 hours, the board adjourned for classified deliberation. Reyes and I waited in a secure holding room, watching the walls as if they might shift. When they called us back in, the decision was clear. A national task force would be launched immediately. A classified briefing would be distributed to state governors and top law enforcement officials. The media would receive a sanitized version, a vague update about ongoing domestic impersonation threats. It wasn't enough for me, but it was a start. We left the SCIF thinking we had done something monumental. What we didn't know was that our identities had been flagged the moment we entered that building. Then 48 hours, both of our safe houses were compromised. Mine was broken into while I was out running recon. Nothing was stolen, but everything had been touched. Reyes found a listening device under her dining table, still warm from use. The message was clear. We were marked. Surveillance. Footage showed no faces, no license plates. Just a black van that lingered near her place for 6 minutes before disappearing. We changed locations again, burned our gear, but the sense of being hunted never left. It was like playing chess against ghosts. Every move we made, they predicted. Every safe route was intercepted. It was during one of our low-visibility surveillance ops in Kansas that we made a breakthrough. Reyes noticed a pattern in the directive's funding. A series of donations routed through a Freedom Foundation based in Wyoming. On paper, it was a think tank promoting civic independence. In reality, it was laundering millions of dollars through shell charities that funded training, gear, and recruitment for the directive. We needed proof. So we infiltrated their upcoming conference under alias identities, posing as wealthy libertarians interested in supporting alternative enforcement initiatives. What we found inside the lodge that weekend was staggering. Men in suits, women in pearls, drinking bourbon and nodding along as speakers delivered slide decks about removing bloated bureaucracy and restoring moral order. Sessions stood out, establishing new law through local power. A man in a crisp navy blazer walked attendees through steps to impersonate public servants without technically breaking federal laws and titles, like community marshal or sovereign investigator. They used euphemisms, but the message was clear. Create fear, establish control, avoid consequences. I filmed it all using a micro camera in my lapel pin. When I sent it back to DC, the Bureau's reaction was immediate. This was no longer a fringe ideology. It was a full-blown insurgency. Raids were planned, names were added to no-fly lists, but it wasn't fast enough. Just 3 days later, the founder of the Freedom Foundation gave a speech at a televised deep town hall, and behind him, standing quietly among staffers, was one of the men who had tried to abduct me outside my home weeks ago. He wasn't hiding, he was being protected. The Bureau confirmed what we feared. Parts of the movement had political cover, not just funding, but influence. That changed the game again. We couldn't rely solely on formal operations. We had to expose them with public pressure. Reyes and I crafted a new plan. Leak carefully redacted portions of our investigation to trusted journalists who could bring the story to light without putting lives at risk. But before we could launch, Reyes was nearly killed. Her car was tampered, with brake lines cut. She survived only because she had swerved onto a gravel shoulder when she saw an oncoming truck swerving into her lane. She called me breathless, from a ditch. "They're escalating," she said. "They're not hiding anymore." I picked her up and we went completely off-grid. Changed names again. Burned every phone. From a hidden cabin in Montana, we sent The final data dump to 5 vetted journalists with a single note: verify everything, follow the money, expose the truth. Within 10 days, the first story hit, then the second. Then national television, interviews with whistleblowers, testimonies from victims, even footage of fake arrests and fabricated enforcement raids. The public was horrified. Senate inquiries were launched. Civil rights organizations demanded answers. And finally, the name Black Directive became something people couldn't ignore. But it came at a cost. 2 of our former contacts disappeared. One was found dead, officially suicide, but the signs were too perfect to clean. Another vanished from a parking lot, never seen again. I knew Reyes and I were next if we didn't disappear fully. But we had done what we set out to do. We had exposed them. We had turned their weapon of secrecy into their greatest vulnerability: public awareness. And the directive wouldn't recover from the exposure, not completely. We also knew they would. Never stop. Not fully. They would evolve, change names, resurface with different slogans and new uniforms. But now, the nation had seen the mask fall. And that gave us the one weapon they feared most: light. After the media eruption, everything changed both in scale and tone. The nation had been shaken by the revelations about the Black Directive's structure, their financial laundering schemes, and the sheer audacity with which they had embedded themselves into state-level enforcement and contracted private security firms. Public trust in certain local law enforcement crumbled overnight, and federal agencies were inundated with tips, survivor accounts, and conspiracy theories. Some of them true, others wildly exaggerated. Reyes and I monitored it all from the remote cabin in Montana, watching with a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. We'd achieved our goal of exposure, but in doing so, we had made ourselves the symbols of resistance against a deeply entrenched threat. The Black Directive wasn't dead. They were simply cornered. And a cornered beast, even when wounded, is dangerous. It wasn't long before we got proof of that. A USB device arrived in the mail at a P.O. box we'd used briefly a year prior. We thought was long deactivated. Inside were video files and encrypted images, compiled dossiers on Reyes and me. Our movements, former aliases, and chillingly detailed photos of our families. My sister in Austin, Reyes' godson in Michigan. Each file had a code word written across the top: reclamation. We took it straight to our bureau contact, now heading the National Task Force. His face went pale as he scanned the files. Isn't just targeting, he said. They're preparing extraction. They're planning to take you. It was clear that going further underground wouldn't be enough anymore. We had to strike again, this time preemptively. So we volunteered for a covert operation, one so dangerous and deep that it would never be written into public record. The Bureau had identified a hidden training compound in Oregon, camouflaged as a survivalist retreat, but functioning as a high-tier directive recruitment and tactical training ground. No drones had successfully scanned it due to advanced jamming equipment. We'd have to infiltrate manually, and the only way to do that was to pretend we were converts disillusioned. Former agents seeking real authority. It took us 3 weeks to build our cover identities. Backed with falsified FBI records and deeply encrypted online footprints suggesting betrayal, frustration, and intent to defect. It was dangerous. If even one operative recognized us from the leaks or television footage, we'd be dead before we could blink. We arrived at the base just past midnight under the call signs Eagle 9 and Falcon 8. A weathered beard and a drone scanner greeted us in total silence. He didn't ask questions, he just gestured toward a vehicle and drove us 20 minutes. Through forested terrain to a remote lodge lit by red bulbs and surrounded by double barbed wire fencing. Inside were 15 others, men and women, most of them ex-military by the way they carried themselves. They were in the middle of a legal extraction simulation, a drill designed to show new recruits how to detain someone in broad daylight without triggering law enforcement response. Watching it was like stepping into a nightmare made real. They used badges from old police departments, forged court orders, and jargon-laced intimidation designed to confuse victims into thinking the arrests were real. One operative bragged, about having pulled off 7 extractions in 2 years with no charges ever filed. The system only reacts if you punch it, he laughed. You just whisper, and people obey. Reyes and I played along, asked intelligent questions, volunteered for night guard rotations. Every hour we were there added to our psychological strain. These weren't merely radicals, they were militarized zealots, convinced that America needed to be rebooted from the inside out. On the 3rd day, we found their war room. Hidden beneath a fake maintenance hatch, it held rows of monitors, satellite phones, and maps covered in color-coded pins. Red meant resolved, blue meant pending, and black meant priority. There were only 4 black pins on the board. 2 of them were near our cabin. They had found us again. I took discreet photos while Reyes downloaded drive contents using a stealth port embedded in her belt buckle. We had less than 2 hours before the system flagged our intrusion. We faked a power outage using a signal disruptor Reyes had smuggled in. During the blackout, we slipped out through the southern perimeter disguised as patrol staff. By dawn, we were 30 miles away, riding in the back of a livestock trailer operated by a sympathetic rancher with an FBI contact. The Bureau launched an immediate raid on the compound, neutralizing 16 members and seizing over 70 firearms. 5 fake DEA vehicles, and a basement full of forged documents, licenses, tax forms, even marriage certificates. The media didn't report any of it. The risk of panic was too high. The official statement claimed the compound was disbanded for firearm trafficking and zoning violations. We knew the truth, but with every raid we realized something horrifying. For every 1 compound we took down, 2 more emerged. The directive had evolved into a decentralized movement. They no longer needed a hierarchy. They operated like a viral code, self-replicating cells, each trained to act autonomously while following the same ideological script. And we were now not just enemies. We were catalysts, figures of both hatred and fear. Reyes received a threatening package at a Bureau safe house a week later, her childhood dog's collar, somehow stolen from her father's home 3 states away. My foster father, a retired officer, is harassed outside his church by 2 men in identical beige uniforms, flashing state authority patrol badges. He knew what they were. He called me that night, voice trembling. They said you had 30 days to surrender, he whispered, or the next visit won't be peaceful. That was when we made the decision. We wouldn't run anymore. We would provoke them, set a trap, let them come to us, and record everything. It took months to plan. We chose a location in rural Wyoming, an abandoned fire station repurposed into a surveillance hub, rigged with 28 hidden cameras, biometric scanners, and remote locks. I filed a fake report to a known directive channel, claiming I had flipped Treddy to deliver Reyes in exchange for immunity. Bait worked. Within 4 days, we picked up encrypted chatter. Package retrieval in progress. Use Route 37 extraction. Authorized. They came at 2:34 a.m. 2 black vans. 6 armed operatives, dressed in fake Homeland Security gear. They breached the side door and moved with tactical precision, unaware they were being watched from every angle. I stood in the central hall, pretending to be tied to a chair. Reyes was unconscious beside me. The moment they approached, I said one word, echo. The room locked down instantly. Steel barriers dropped, smoke grenades activated. Remote. Tasers deployed from ceiling turrets. Within 30 seconds, it was over. The directive squad was immobilized, cuffed, and blindfolded. The Bureau arrived 6 minutes later. What followed was the most public trial in Bureau history involving impersonation of federal officers. The video went viral. America watched as men with forged badges begged for leniency, insisting they were patriots. The judge didn't buy it. Life sentences were handed down, no parole. But even as we stood outside the courthouse, blinking against the sunlight, Reyes turned to me and said, "This isn't the end. This was only a warning shot." She was right. Because buried inside one of the confiscated phones was a message, time-stamped 10 minutes before the raid, echo trap confirmed. Retreat all secondary units. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. We had caught a cell, but the directive had adapted, and something bigger was coming. The message inside the phone chilled us, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed a truth we had both been suppressing for weeks. This wasn't over, not even close. Phase 2 wasn't just a retaliatory move, it was a strategic pivot. The Black Directive had always counted on our focus being local, physical, boots on the ground. But this new message hinted at something more expansive, more digital, more systemic. Back at Bureau headquarters, digital forensics confirmed what we feared. Embedded in the firmware of the seized phones were stealth programs codes, designed to ping servers across North America at scheduled intervals, triggering deep web broadcasts and activating burner cell chains. The messages were brief and cryptic. Black Authority reborn. Community rule phase 2 begins. It wasn't a movement anymore. It was an ideology spreading like a virus, evolving in real time. Reyes and I began tracing these new nodes. Using AI filters, decentralized network mapping, even gaming servers where directive sympathizers had built entire simulated worlds where their control was absolute. They were recruiting from younger demographics now, radicalizing teenagers through gamified sovereignty simulations layered inside shooter games and prepper forums. It was brilliant, terrifying, and nearly undetectable. Even with our advanced tech, we couldn't keep up with how fast it grew. By the time we shut down one server, 3 more would pop up. We managed to trace one central account controlling dozens of these simulation clusters to a P.O. box in Utah. From there, we uncovered a hidden server farm operating out of a decommissioned mining facility, one that had been leased under an LLC registered to a dead man. We launched a raid, expecting to find a few geeks in hoodies. Instead, we found a fully staffed operational command, complete with biometric scanners, a crypto mining rig, and propaganda print shops producing fake flyers that looked like official documents from various county sheriff departments. They were creating the illusion of government authority, mailing these forged memos to residents in vulnerable neighborhoods, demanding cooperation, fees, and compliance signatures. Worse, they were being believed. One elderly couple in Nevada had paid nearly $9,000 in homeowner adjustment taxes to a directive cell posing as the state's Property Integrity Bureau. Another woman had turned over her children temporarily to a fake family restoration unit, thinking it was part of a social reform pilot program. These weren't just power-hungry extremists anymore. These were psychological warfare experts, blending truth and fiction so seamlessly that the average American couldn't tell the difference. And that's when the most terrifying revelation landed in our laps. A decrypted email exchange between directive commanders referencing an operation Night Ledger, scheduled for rollout across 6 swing states ahead of an election year. The plan was chilling in its simplicity. Use impersonated authority figures to control polling stations, so confusion, delay votes, and trigger constitutional challenges that would tie up results in court for months. The goal wasn't to win an election. It was to delegitimize democracy itself. We immediately went to the Bureau with everything. Emergency meetings were held at the highest levels. Federal judges were briefed. Cybersecurity task forces were put on 24-hour shifts. The directive anticipated the reaction. Their fallback plan launched days later, a deepfake campaign. Within 48 hours, social media was flooded with generated videos of federal officials making fake speeches endorsing directive principles, claiming martial law was on the table, or worse, calling for community-led enforcement. Chaos ignited. Instantly, people didn't know what to believe. Town halls erupted in protest. Some sheriffs even refused federal coordination, claiming their chain of command had been compromised. America teetered on the edge of something irreversible. Reyes and I worked day and night to put out fires disproving videos, issuing real-time clarifications, but we were just 2 people trying to hold back a tidal wave. And then came the last blow. One night, as we were finalizing a leak of confirmed directive donors, high-profile figures including CEOs and retired military brass wore power cutout, the generator failed seconds later. Slow knock came at the door. 3 men stood outside in clean suits. No badges, no insignia. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. We escaped through the attic crawlspace, sprinting into the woods with only thermal gear and a single encrypted flash drive. We didn't go to the bureau that night. We didn't trust anyone. We fled to Alaska. 3 months we lived in silence off-grid. No communication, surviving on freeze-dried meals and filtered creek water. Every day, I wondered if we were too late, if our mission had failed. Then, in early spring, Reyes received a burner ping on a frequency we hadn't used in a year. It was from the Bureau. A simple message. "You were right. Full declassification ordered. Report to Anchorage." When we arrived, the Anchorage field office director met us with tears in her eyes. She'd lost her brother to the directive. The national government had finally declared the Black Directive a domestic terrorism threat. Every agency was now aligned. Budgets were approved. Media outlets were given license to name and shame. For the first time, the public saw the unfiltered truth. Arrests followed. Networks were dismantled. Donors were outed and prosecuted. But the damage was already done. America would never forget the months of fear, the fake enforcers, the false arrests, the 911 calls, where no one knew if the officer on the other end was real. And while the directive's visible infrastructure crumbled, we knew the ideology was still out there, festering in chat rooms, mutating into new symbols, new flags, new words. We had won a battle, not the war. And so Reyes and I made a pact. We would never fully retire. We'd vanish. Yes, change names, change continents if needed, but we would always monitor the signal. Because freedom isn't static, it's fragile. It demands vigilance, and we had paid too high a price to ever stop watching. We knew our story would fade into obscurity, reduced to headlines and case files. But if you've made it this far, if you're still reading, listening, or wondering, know this: not all uniforms mean justice, and not every badge is real. Question everything. Verify before obeying. And when someone knocks, asking you to surrender your rights in the name of community safety, look closer, because they may not be who they claim to be. Stay sharp, stay free, and always remember light defeats the shadows. If you want more true stories like this one, filled with twists, suspense, and justice that doesn't back down, make sure to subscribe to Sham Stories on YouTube for powerful narratives you won't forget.